if we're going to recap the game action, we got to start with the elephant in the room. NFL officiating is officially, it's just a joke, right? Okay? And that's one of the biggest storylines to come out of this if we're just talking philosophy. I mean, like I said, I refuse to go back and rewatch it today, so I could try to explain to the X's and O's of what the Bills did differently, but there's smarter people out there, right? People with far more composure than you and I. The Bruce Nolans, well, I don't even know. I don't want to say Aaron Quinn, because Aaron Quinn, I mean, I feel like that show is like Anthony Prohaska is the film guy. Greg is the face. If they were an A-team, he'd be a mix between Hannibal and Mr. T, if only because the only thing he'll throw in like a one-liner, and then he's got some crazy ideas. Like that. All right. Maybe I'm taking too much away from Aaron. He's a smart guy too, but there's smarter people out there who can break down the X's and O's. Here's what I know. You can't tell the story of this game without bringing up NFL officiating. We've been complaining about it all season, as have most fan bases. Pundits have written articles all season long about how bad the officiating is. Sunday was not only no different, but it was one of the most glaring cases of the NFL's haves and have-nots. And the Buffalo Bills have not. The Buccaneers defense was to a man simply allowed to play a different type of football than we were. There was a different, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's like a different philosophy that they were allowed to play with, simply because they wore a different jersey than ours. And the refs propped it up.
I saw a couple of screen grabs from the game with there's like a tweet of find somebody who holds you the way that Carlton Davis holds Stephon Diggs, and it's all the shots of him just blatant holds.
If you spend any time on Twitter or social media today or yesterday, you were inundated with it. You were inundated with video, photos, actual explanations from guys like Dean Blandino and from other, like going back to last year's Bills-Rams game, where they broke down what the cornerback did to Gabe Davis at the end of the Rams game warranted a flag. Even though it didn't look like it, it warranted a flag. And then you take that logic and try to apply it to what happened yesterday, and you can't. It just wasn't. We're talking about two different football. We might as well be talking about two different sports, if that's supposed to be the letter of the law. I don't know. I mean, Scott Novak and his crew just blatantly flaunted what the spirit of the rule was supposed to be in order to call the game the way they did. And there's no answer for it. I mean, if there's a silver lining, it's that the world at large finally got to see, because this was on an elevated stage, that this is the bullshit that occurred. I mean, ESPN analysts, Fox Sports commentators, Big Cat from Barstool, even Nelly, Nelly, longest yard running back in the movie, the creator of Hot in Here, which, incidentally, I once watched a father of the bride get hammered at his daughter's wedding and strip to his whitey-tighties on the dance floor to that song. Like I wonder how... Chris, it was to my delight. His family's just horror and embarrassment. How many lives has that song ruined?
Thousands.
Child support alone. It's rampant. It's getting hot in here. Take off all your clothes. Even Nelly took to Twitter to be like, hey, I love Tom Brady, but that's some bullshit right there. If everybody can see it, how can this league continue to allow this? If it's in front, I mean, the emperor has no clothes. That's what this is. It's like everybody's like, what is happening here?
Well, we know Novak's crew's not going to be calling the Super Bowl. We know that's for sure.
But at this point, who will be?
Bill Vinovich,
because he's the only one smart enough to just stick his hands in his pockets and go, guys,
we should do that. We should do that right now. Seagrams on who's officiating. Seagrams on who's officiating the Super Bowl.
Are you taking Bill?
I'm going to take Bill Vinovich.
I'll take the field. There you go, sir. Bang. That's a bet. I mean, here's the thing. It's egregious, and it's just another sign that the NFL, while not being a poverty league like the NHL, has no ability to marshal its game anymore. They've overcomplicated this thing, and they don't have full-time officials. They tried that, and then for some reason they didn't want to pay what it would cost, and there was a whole fracas about that, and then there was no officials, and then there were scabs doing the job, and now we're back to part-time officials. I don't know what they're doing, but what they've done is they've created such a complex series of rules that every football game can be ruled differently from one game to the next, depending on who's involved. That's a problem, especially when you're talking about a group of guys whose actual livelihoods, actual job performance on the field doesn't matter, because most of them are lawyers, teachers, superintendents. These are guys who are wealthy men outside the scope of what they get paid to be NFL officials. So with that in mind, there's no incentive for them to focus on this and actually get the calls right, because if they're wrong, what's going to happen? How many times has a ref been suspended for being egregiously wrong? Wasn't Ed Hockley the only one? He's the only one in my lifetime that I can remember. Yeah, exactly. You're staring off into space. You got nothing. Neither do I. And while it's easy to sit here and talk about conspiracy theories, and this is what I mean, Chris. This is where things come off the rails, though. Everyone wants to believe that the league is trying to prop up certain teams. You're right. The deference happens. You see it. And we've grown accustomed to saying things like this. But I believe in Occam's razor. I think these guys are in over their heads. I think they're poorly taught the nuances of the rules. The rules keep getting more complicated. And far too often, it's like everybody, you defer to the judgment of one. Chris, there was a play on Sunday where one guy on the sideline ruled it a catch, one ruled it incomplete, and then they had to have a giant meeting about what. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you say it's complete and you say it isn't, what happened? Then they get together and they decide that, but it took like a 5-minute conversation to come to what was inevitably a completed catch. So then what did you see that you said it wasn't caught? Did you just assume the guy didn't step? Was there any video review? If they actually gave a damn about any of this, they would do something about it. But the fact is, I don't think they can. I think these guys are poorly taught. There's just too much. And far too often, they defer to the guy who didn't see the play. The head referee comes in, tries to be the arbiter of what the rule book is supposed to be. But to your point, this is a crew that calls PI all the time, and they didn't call a single one in our favor yesterday. That's hilarious to me. What that tells you is that guy, the final arbiter, the head referee, every game is different depending on who you get at that position at this point. That's why this whole Sky Judge thing needs to get some traction. It has to, because yesterday it was just too bad. It's just too egregious. And here's the worst part. I think half the reason those guys are making those decisions, he's simply looking at the body language of the people involved, right? Because you've seen it, players who carp the loudest. Tom Brady, there was a play that went against Tampa Bay. He saw the flag and immediately started pointing to his face mask. Like, oh, you called that, right? Like, you called the fact that he touched my face. I bet you he gets more. He does this, like, this behavior is learned. Because they know if they carp to the officials enough, eventually officials cave. They're human, right? In that way, these guys are walking around going, who do I want to get chewed out by? Tom Brady and Bruce Arians? Or Sean McDermott and Josh Allen? Who's actually getting in my face about this? Human nature is to take the path of least resistance in most things. I know it's how I get my job done. It's how I've gotten my job done for years, and I do it damn well. You just break people psychologically. In that way, some of the NFL's best coaches are really good at that aspect of this, and it's why they get a lot of deference. I don't think it has... You can make the case that they're trying to rig the Super Bowl or they want a certain outcome. And you know what? I can't fight you on that, but I think it's like when people talk about 9/11 being an inside job and you hear the quote where it's like, have you ever tried to keep a secret between 5 people? What if you're trying to keep a secret between 500 people? Good luck. There's 124 officials. You don't think one of those guys is going to talk? Be like, oh yeah, kind of we were told by the league to prop up. No. Yeah. I think the reason that we're always on the receiving end of this, we've got a milquetoast head coach. We've got one star player on our roster. We've got a wide receiver that they don't regard as a star because he plays on a team that's in a small market in the middle of nowhere. And they never have to visit here, so they're not worried about it. And it explains some of the wild stats that people have dug up on this front for the Bills. We have one defensive holding call by an opposing defensive back in over 500 pass attempts for the Bills this season. One defensive holding. Just 6 coverage penalties all season, but Tampa Bay got 3 in this game alone. How fucking crazy is that?
It's insane.
And in an era where roughing the passer flags have been flying around with abandon, Allen has only received 2 to his credit, despite the number of times he's constantly getting hammered. Between his own fault, our shitty offensive line play. I mean, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Either way, we got to live with it. And that's the rub. None of this matters. That's why I'm sitting here drinking 2 beers. None of it matters. Get mad about the officiating. Be frustrated. But you don't get to cry to me about penalties when you score 3 points in a single half of football. That kind of stuff is the epitome of what Sean Connery was talking about in the movie The Rock, right? He's talking to Nicolas Cage. And he goes, well, I tried my best. Your best? Your best? Only losers cry about their best. Winners, they go home with the prom queen. That's it. Losers talk about how the refs took a game away from you that ultimately went to overtime. You went to overtime, but the refs took that away from you? After you scored 3 points in a single half of football? I don't know. I just... Losers talk about that. Winners find a way to assert themselves, even in the face of that adversity. I mean, we were that team once. I don't know if you all remember, but back on a Sunday night in Kansas City, that honestly feels so long ago that I can't actually remember if it really happened or not. Like I feel it's like a dream that you wake up from and you so badly want to get back to it and you want to remember what that felt like. You can't. You can only kind of remember the rough outline of what it was and what it felt like, but it felt real. But you just can't get back to the parts of it that you enjoyed so much back there in the moment. That's what the Kansas City game is to me. But in that game, weren't we getting flagged to death by Carl Sheffers and his crew? And yet the Buffalo Bills found a way to overcome. In every single instance, they said, look, we're going to keep driving. We're going to keep making plays. We're going to be aggressive. There's no one to blame for that but the players in the field and coaches on the sideline. They came out flat and paid the price for it, despite the Herculean effort by their quarterback. So, while I understand officiating's broken, do not cry to me about that in the aftermath of this football game.